Everybody good? All right, I'd like to call the meeting to order, please. We're going to begin tonight just for our agenda discussion, so we'll go ahead and jump right into that. If you guys should have a paper copy in front of you. If not, you've got to pull it up there on a screen. As we move through there, you'll see that we've got an exemplar recognition. Looks like Ottawa High School JROTC. So far, just one delegation listed. The regular financial report there. Our minutes from December. Our executive committee report. Anything in that top section there that anybody wants to address? Yes, Ms. Thurman?
Okay, yeah, those are the trips, right?
We're not to field trips yet, no ma'am.
All right,
Okay, I'm getting there. Anything there in the top portion? All right.
No,
Okay, all right, so let's get to then next year we've got field trips. Ms. Thurman.
Okay, here again, we don't have one, we don't have two, but we have 3 out of the country trips. Again, it's got two of these look like are in the summer, and one looks like it's in, like I say, my screen's not up yet, so in February, yeah, 2 of them are in February, like February the 18th through the 25th or something like that, 27th. Like I have it right here, hold on just a minute.
February 18th through 24th.
24th, there you go, I got it, okay. And like I say, there again, I have to question, especially in lieu of things that are going on in the world today, I still think it's something that we need to look at. Scott, legally, I know you say you think it protects us to approve these. I think it actually puts us in more peril to do that. I just want to ask again, because if something happens, I'm going to say, here once again.
Well, like any field trip, the board can look at this and decide, okay, is there a legitimate educational purpose for it? And the proposal as it's set out.
But Scott, that's not even my issue. My issue is it's during the summer. They're not in school. Why is this our business?
Sure.
That's where I'm coming down. I mean, you can tell me all the educational stuff about it you want. You can tell me teachers are going. If a parent wants a teacher to take their kids somewhere, that's their business. It's not ours. I'm just having a real problem understanding why this isn't putting us in. I mean, a friend of mine was one of the teachers that got hurt really bad in that accident that happened when some teachers even went on a educational trip up to Laura Ingalls Wilder Country. You probably remember it. They got hit by a truck. Mm-hmm. They were in a wagon, and it almost killed one of our teachers, and she had to be flown home. Now, things like that happen. This one just so happened to have happened here in the United States, but things like that do happen. And so I just, I don't know. Like I say, I just don't like. I continue to feel like, just have a real uneasy feeling that this puts us in more peril by approving these than if we just said, this is your kid, you do with him what you want to in the summer.
Well, so if we could do that, and if we could be consistent, if we could shut the door and know that there was no leakage, then yes, the board could say flat out, there are no field trips within these parameters.
We can't say that there's no. I mean, I don't care what you do in the summer. If it's not during school time, I don't think it should be any of our business.
Well, and so that's.
I mean, the people don't ask if they can take their kids to Florida.
So that's
I don't understand.
That's where I was going. So, if you wanted to shut the door and say, we're not going to have anything to do with any kind of trips. Our teachers aren't going to go. We're not going to advertise at school. We're not going to have any kind of meetings at school about folks who want to go and do whatever. And if we could shut the door and know that there was no leakage whatsoever, you could do that. And that would reduce your exposure close to zero, assuming you could enforce it. The problem is that's not the way school works. You have kids who get together, they talk to their Spanish teacher sets up an interesting program, collects information, kids organize, they meet at school, and you end up having de facto trips. And so from my perspective, and again, this is totally up to the board. This is one of those policy decisions that the board gets to make. And whatever y'all choose to do, I draft a policy to implement that. Right now, your policy says this is a permissible trip. But the board can say, you know what, we're going to change the way we do business going forward, and this is what that's going to look like. That is totally your province. My concern is if you do not shut the door all the way, then what you create is a world in which you have unregulated field trips where our risk is unknowable until there's a problem. That's my concern for you. But if so your current policy allows you to regulate these trips to decide, do we approve it, yes or no? And if we approve it, here's what it's going to look like. If the board, in the exercise of its policy-making authority, wants to say, we just don't think that summer trips are a good idea, and no employee of Hamilton County Schools is going to facilitate or organize these, and we're not going, and no school is going to facilitate these, you can do that. And as long as we enforce it so that we have no leakage, we're good. The reality of it is these trips have been going on for a very long time. And it's not just these trips that we're talking about. Again, I've mentioned we have the GAP program, the German-American exchange program. So it's not just this, that there are permutations really across the board. I would actually have to ask operations and schools how many international trips we have. I have no idea. I mean, I don't know if y'all do, but my guess is what you decide here has permutations for a lot of schools that we haven't even thought about yet.
Yeah.
Dr. Highlander?
I consider them soft American targets, and it just really, I'm very uneasy about that.
But by the same token, you could rate, and I am very sympathetic to that. By the same token, you could ask questions about what's the wisdom of going to D.C. during the school year, or New York. I mean, there's a
Downtown Chattanooga.
Downtown Chattanooga. I do, again, I am very risk adverse. I think if we cannot eliminate the risk, then we need to control it. That's where I operate from. If we can't eliminate it, let's control it. But I completely recognize this board may say, this board may say that in this climate we think it's an unacceptable risk and we need to shut the door and guard against leakage. And I'll help you draft that policy too.
Dr. Highlander.
Okay. I have seen a lot of value in international trips. I mean, a great deal. My daughters went. I've been on 2 each when they were in high school years ago. And right now, with that Ukrainian airliner going down, and we are in the most volatile situation that we've been in, and Americans are soft targets right now. And I'm extremely concerned at the immediate time about the danger of these children going out. And these are middle schoolers that are going to Barcelona, Spain. And Spain's on the Iberian Peninsula on the western end of the Mediterranean, and I'm just, maybe the parent and grandparent in me is coming out more than is as much as the school board member. But I'm very concerned that right now is one of the most volatile times that we've ever had. And I agree with what everyone said. Things can happen in Chattanooga, they can happen in New York, they can happen in Washington. But as in America, we have a little more control over it than we do in foreign places. So I'm just very concerned. And you're saying that we cannot leave it up to the parents to make the decision and have it on them
Well,
rather than us.
Well, I think absolutely the parents decide if they want their kids to participate in a school-sponsored field trip. So, I mean, absolutely, if the parent says, I don't want to send my kid to Spain,
They're not going to go.
even
Yeah.
if it's sponsored by the good folks at CSAS and they've taken all these protections, I mean, obviously the parents have the right to say no. If your question is, can we simply step out of the field trip business, the summer field trip business, and say, if parents want to organize this, they can, God bless them, enjoy in good health? Sure. But at that point, we need to be very careful that our people are not facilitating the trip. Because what will go sideways like that will be, God forbid something goes wrong, the question will be, well, okay, who knew about it? Did anyone at the school know about it? Did any agent of the board know about this? Did they follow the chaperone policy? Did these people get vetted? Was there enough supervision? So
Are we culpable? Are we culpable when our employees who are not working for us in the summer are dealing with this? You understand what I'm saying?
I do.
We don't control them, 365 days a year.
That's right. So the question will be, if the trip, even though it's not approved by the board, if it in some sense carries the imprint of the board, the implied endorsement of the board, what I would look for if I were making the argument that, yes, this particular trip did, okay, so there were 12 people on the trip, and curiously 8 of them were in the Spanish class at East Hamilton. There was one adult, and curiously she happens to be the teacher of Spanish at East Hamilton. There were organizational meetings for this trip, and curiously they were all at East Hamilton. There were advertisements recruiting people, and you see where it's going. So we can do the monkeys, the see no, hear no evil, see no evil, speak no. You know what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
And we can pretend that it's not our trip, but if the facts suggest it is, then it doesn't make any difference what our policy is. That's my concern. But truthfully, if the board wants to shut it down, we need to change the policy, but we can shut it down. And we did this a few years ago, sort of. So we had situations where the board had, you were aware of teachers who would recruit people to go on trips. And if they got enough trips, then their trip was comped, the teacher trip was comped. And if they recruited some more people, then maybe there was some financial incentive for them.
Or their spouse could go.
And so the administration, and this is a long time ago, had some concern that created a conflict of interest for the teachers. And so the board revised the field trip policy. And if you look at the field trip policy, the very, very, very end of it, it basically says no private trips. And so the board said, because of the conflict of interest and the fact that we have unregulated trips, you may recall the Signal Mountain spring break trip with the cruise. So that's why the board went in that direction and said, okay, we're not going to have unregulated private trips. The board's going to regulate them. It was for that very reason. The board can just as easily revert back to the policy that you had years ago.
Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Robinson.
Sure. So I was going to suggest that perhaps we review this policy at a later date because I do think that this policy is going to continue to come up more and more. But I think that your point is very accurate, Scott, that, we have the right to say yes or no. And if we say yes, then what does that look like? And I think that right now maybe this policy looks one way, and maybe based on feedback, perhaps the board needs to discuss it looking a different way. So all that to say, though, with CSAS's upcoming trip, I will be supporting that trip. I think that these experiences are very important for our students. I think that if parents are on board for these trips, then, there's a level of accountability that has been taken already by these parents, and we need to acknowledge that and remember that they are also choosing to send their students. I know that at the last board meeting or the last agenda session, people had questions about this trip, and I did talk to Principal Bowles about those questions. So if anybody has those questions today and they would like answers, I do have information from him, and I'm happy to answer them. He's also here, and so I'm sure he'd be glad to answer any questions that we have if you guys would like him to. So I don't think I have the right to call him up, but perhaps Chairman Wingate would allow that.
I tell you what, let me, let's get through Mrs. Hill and maybe Mr. McClennan, unless they have questions that could be answered by Mr. Bowles, and then.
They may not.
Okay.
Yeah, it's fine.
Go ahead, Ms. Hill.
We've got kind of two conversations happening here. I think we've got this policy conversation and then a fear conversation about the state of the world. I believe that international travel promotes peace, and I think that the trips that Hamilton County schools are a part of are geared toward that. Right now, I'm hosting a student from Tono, Japan. That exchange has happened for 30 years. It has changed lives in positive ways, and international affairs can change on a dime, on a tweet, on anything, and I choose not to live in fear, but make policy in a wise and thoughtful and conservative way. I think that as a board, we need to be respectful of the realities of time for planning of international trips. And I agree wholeheartedly with Tiffany that if this is a policy that we as a board really want to dig into, I think we need to give it the time it deserves and approve trips based on our current policy, and then take the time to really study this and be able to let schools know when we're going to implement it, because plane tickets get purchased way in advance. Planning for these trips happens a year in advance. So if we were to decide that we wanted to make a significant alteration to our international travel field trips as it relates to them being overnight, I think it would be the respectful and thoughtful thing to do to really take a hard and lengthy look at it.
Mrs. Thurman.
Yeah. If, I hate to be sarcastic, but if these are peace trips, we ought to send a bunch to Iran. That to me is a ridiculous statement, but whatever. And also, Scott, I'm concerned about the law. And we've talked about this before, about just regular field trips here in Chattanooga, that by law, we cannot allow students to go on a field trip if everyone doesn't get to go, if it's educational. So I'm wanting to know if, and this is absolutely the law. It's not our policy. This is law.
No, you're exactly right.
I know I'm exactly right because I bring it up every time, and it just gets looked over. But it's absolutely the law. How do we get around that with these trips?
So, because these trips are outside of the regular school session.
Bingo.
But here's the thing. Just because something is outside of the regular 180 days doesn't mean it doesn't carry your blessing. So if you send a sports team out of town during winter break or during spring break, they're still your team, right? School's not in session, but they're still your team. If you have a football camp during the summer out of town, it's still your people. So the fact that school isn't in session only means you do not owe that trip to kids who would go.
But everybody on the team gets to go, unless there's a discipline issue.
But
I've been on lots of those trips, on lots of those camps myself.
Sure, but not everybody gets to go. Only the team gets to go.
That's right.
It's a qualifier.
Okay, so only you're just going to have the people that get. So how do you still say on the field trips, everybody gets to go if it's educational. It's not like it's a team, it's a classroom, so everybody in the classroom is on the team, so they get to go.
So the state regulation, the state regulation says that field trips have to be free to every student when any portion of it is offered during the regular school day or it's offered for course credit. So if what you have here is a truly extracurricular trip. And it's not offered for credit, and it's not during the regular school day. You do not have to make it free and available to everybody. So there's actually a state board rule that speaks to this. But you're spot on. During the regular school year, regular school day tied to credit, trips have got to be free for everybody who whether they can afford to go or not.
All right. Dr. Highlander.
Real quickly, and clarify this for me.
Yes, sir.
For Chattanooga School for the Liberal Arts is in the regular school time when these 4 robotics team members are planning to go to compete in Barcelona, Spain. I think it's a great opportunity, but I'm just saying, how does that, does that play into your scenario there at all? Since it is the regular school day.
It's the regular school day. So the robotics team is more in the nature, it's truly extracurricular. It's like a sports team. So the condition of going is you have to qualify to be on the team. In all other respects, it's a field trip. It's the same thing as any other overnight out of town trip. Now play this out. Let's suppose that let's say they can't raise the funds to go. I can't go. Now my understanding from looking at that is that the funds are available, but But otherwise, your analysis is much more like Rhonda's situation, Ms. Thurman's situation, because it is a school-sponsored club during the regular school year.
Okay, any other questions about that? Mr. Bowles, you want to make any comment at all about the trip? I mean, nobody addressed you directly, so I'm assuming they didn't have a question for you.
I think just one quick point of clarification, Mr. Bowles. CSAS trip, not here nor there in the conversation. CSAS's trips are high school students are involved. CSLA is not. So just to clarify here nor there that the CSAS are both high school trips.
All right, let's move on here then.
You say CSLA?
SAS.
CSLA?
Okay, anything else there under field trips? Under any of those other learning communities or CTE or exceptional ed? Okay. Anything there? I guess that brings us to business, bids and contracts. Anyone have a bid or contract they'd like to address there? Okay. Financial report for November. Any question about that? That brings us then to budget amendments, the grants and self-funded programs. A few of those there. All right, then under Chief of Staff there, we have board policy, student disciplinary procedures. Go ahead, Ms. Thurman.
Yeah, this student disciplinary procedures, did we get a lot of feedback from the principals about this? Some of this I kind of wondered about how they felt about it, because some felt like, that expressed to me, that they thought that, I don't know if the lack of a better word, students were getting a little bit too many chances before they could deal with an issue. Like if someone was sent to their office, that they had to do a whole lot more work with this student and had to send them back to class so they could deal with all the steps in there.
Yeah, so I think you're probably talking about the code of acceptable behavior and not necessarily with policy, but we are working with that committee still.
Well, I mean, don't they kind of tie in with each other? Because you
Yeah.
kind of have to take the same steps.
Code of Acceptable Behavior support this policy.
Right.
And so that committee that originally started with Dr. Bradshaw to develop the code, we've had them back in. And one of the first steps that we're trying to take is a lot of consternation around the process through the disciplinary hearing authority and how much time people are spending out. And so we're revising that process and should have that in the next 2 weeks to give to principals and assistant principals. We've already kind of soft rolled out a little bit of it, and hopefully already seeing some positives. We don't have any hearings tomorrow, which is a first in a while. So we are going to revise that, and then we'll bring that committee back together. I actually got a phone call from a principal today saying, been looking at it, have some thoughts. So we'll bring some revisions back to you, and I would assume that your committee's still in place. We'd want to call that committee together again to look at the Code of Acceptable Behavior.
Okay, yeah, but so would this affect this at all, what you're doing? Well, this is
Yeah,
just
it's
going
gonna
to affect this
support
policy.
this
It's going to
policy.
support this policy.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and just to maybe put a finer point on it, the code of acceptable behavior is more procedural.
Right.
So that's where I think you're talking about, Ron, as far as the steps, it would be in that code. Right. There are, yeah, but it's a little more broad than the code of acceptable behavior. It gets a little more discreet in the code, and that's what, Justin, that's what that committee is working through, absolutely.
Mrs. Robinson.
I've talked to Dr. Johnson about this, but since we're on the topic, I'll ask about it. I've heard from some of my elementary principals that the committee is still working on an elementary school code of acceptable behavior. Is that correct? Okay. Do we have an idea of when that might be coming out?
It's not a code of acceptable behavior, but
Okay.
it is a behavioral manual.
Okay.
And it should be, it's just in the final stages of editing.
Okay.
So it should be ready, they'll be reviewing it on Friday, I think.
Oh,
And then we should have it ready for print next week.
Okay. And how does that function with this? Do they go hand in hand, or is the manual something very different?
It's something very different.
Okay.
And it talks about more about our classes, teaching kids how to learn and to prepare them for learning, and focusing more on the correct behaviors and support.
It's more like classroom management, or no, maybe
So.
No, not really.
Somewhat.
Classroom. Yes and no.
okay.
So yes, it does provide a lot of support, but it doesn't have consequences for behaviors, because we really want to teach them how to behave in school and focus more on the positive and teaching them what we expect within the classroom.
Okay. All right. I look forward to. Will we get a chance to read it just so we can have it a sense? Okay. Well, I look forward to that. Thank you.
All right, anything else on that item? Okay, that brings us to Dr. Robertson. Will you just talk a little bit about these security officers, please?
Yes, sir. So this is a basically request to
Or up to 10 student security officers. I want to put a point on the title. Someone earlier today said that student security officer sounds like we're hiring students. We're not hiring students. So the plan is to hire up to 10 of these student security officers that would work alongside Dr. Corbin, the student security coordinator, and their function would basically be to monitor, to provide some type of surveillance, not the same function as an SRO. So they're not going to be providing counseling sessions for kids. They would operate just like a security officer would be in the hallways and the cafeterias, monitoring the outsides of the buildings. And we'd use the funds that the board set aside to hire additional SROs to fund this through the end of the year. There is a provision in state law, and I've got need to sit with Mr. Bennett to make sure we're on board here, but we've been in contact with them. It's basically a provision that allows us, if we go through a process of filling out some paperwork, doing some training, that we would be basically able to arm these officers. They would be able to carry firearms. They'd have to go through a lot of training on firearm retention, all the normal steps that you would expect. And Dr. Corbin, because of his past and his previous experience, has the ability to support us in that. So we're talking with the state now in anticipation of approving this to make sure that we are dotting our I's, crossing our T's to make this happen. So these would be our employees. They'd be armed security officers, and they'd be patrolling our campuses on schools that don't have SROs. We're looking, we think that we can put this in the range, and been talking to Keith about pay grade and how we would classify it, but we're looking somewhere between $35,000 and $40,000, which would allow us to hopefully attract some either retired police officers, maybe even some existing park rangers or people of that nature that have some experience with this. So that's the request, to hire up to 10 of these security officers.
Mrs. Jones.
So maybe this is a Scott question, Justin question, I don't know. So is this like a UTC police officer, or the hospital officers? They like how Erlanger used to have their own force, or I guess I'm just trying. Well, Erlanger has Walden now, but nevertheless, is it? So I guess I'm trying to grasp what that looks like, because I'm trying to figure out how far they're going to be able to go before we need CPD or Hamilton County.
So, well, the easy line of demarcation is the folks at UTC and the folks at Erlanger are commissioned officers. They're post-certified commissioned law enforcement officers. They have all the power that Hamilton County, Red Bank, City of Chattanooga, and every municipality does. These would be security officers, so they would not have the same authority under the Constitution or under Tennessee law that a law enforcement officer would. They're security as opposed to being charged with the responsibility to enforce the criminal law. And that may not be a clear distinction. I mean, civil authority versus criminal authority.
Right.
The only thing I would add is that, I think when we've been having this conversation about SROs and trying to get positions filled and several vacancies that we have. One of the big areas of concern for us has been, when you consider, and this isn't a knock on any external security organization, but when you think about a Walden or, one of those types, they're not as specialized and specific in regards to supporting children. And so I think it's mentioned because of Dr. Corbin's expertise, it affords us an opportunity to maybe look at this as at least a stopgap, and it may be something that we need to consider long-term if there continue to be hiring challenges, but they would have more specialized training because of the expertise that we have on staff, which would, I think, I know for me, put everybody at ease in regards to having a security officer type present in schools and around buildings. And so it's really leveraging the expertise that we now have on staff with Dr. Corbin to deliver the training in a more specialized way. But it's taking a Walden type of officer and really focusing it on the student support.
Okay.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you. I mean, we're a little late, I think, but we're moving in the right direction. So Justin, Dr. Corbin, whoever's responsible for finally getting the ball rolling, I really appreciate that. A couple of questions is I'm confident that you guys have have included the sheriff in these conversations, and he likes this idea, and he's all for us, and I'm saying again.
I know that Dr. Corbin is actually, conference he's at, he's with Captain Shepard, I apologize, Captain Shepard, and Captain Shepard is aware of this plan, and talked to Sergeant Fields today. He's aware of the plan and supported it. I've not had a conversation with the sheriff, but I believe that.
Dr. Corbin did last week. He met with Sheriff Hammond last week.
So the sheriff he's supportive.
And we're working with them on other stopgaps too. We've got a couple of schools that we're trying to get started next week to where we have off-duty officers fill in as well. So this isn't the only measure that we're taking to try to fill these schools. If we can get some off-duty officers to fill some of the gaps, we're going to start that hopefully next week as well.
I guess what I'd like to hear Thursday before we vote on this, and again, I'm so glad that we're moving in this direction. I would like to hear from somebody, yes, Sheriff Hammond is all in with this. I'd like to hear that before we vote on Thursday. The other thing, I think I might have heard Dr. Johnson just address this. My other question was, as it relates to the firearms, who's going to be providing that training? I think I heard you say Dr. Corbin would do that. Or?
Yeah, to be clear though, we'd be working in partnership with the Sheriff's Department. So Dr. Corbin met with the sheriff last week. In full transparency, you all know we've been going around and around with trying to get these positions filled. We started out with offering an incentive through the Sheriff's Department, and then we moved to obviously hiring Dr. Corbin. And now we're at a place now where there's definitely that urgency there to try to get these roles filled. That because of the Sheriff's Department's training regimen, which is a positive, but because of the training, because of the job market, candidly, they just got a long runway to get there, to get folks in, and so hopefully this helps to fill the gap. But absolutely, we'll be working in partnership with the Sheriff's Department, and Dr. Corbin's had some preliminary conversation about this. This evolved in the last week, really, and we've been looking at like Knox County and some other places that Dr. Corbin was aware of in California and some different places where he had some knowledge about school systems that had their own internal types of structures, and leveraged that from even the job description to thinking about the development of it to really help us begin the infancy stages of putting this together.
Again, let me just emphasize again, Justin and your whole team is working on it. Thank y'all for moving in this direction. Just as an aside, I was at Dalton Middle School and Dalton High School this past Friday, and I'm telling you, you'd have better luck getting in the Oak Ridge Atomic Nuclear Plant than you do those two schools. And so I hope that we're thinking in that direction. I believe we are. But again, I think it would just go miles to be able to hear Sheriff Hammond say, I'm all in with this. I think that's important.
Mrs. Hill.
Thank you. So we all agree that a SRO, a school resource officer, is the gold standard of what we would like to have in our schools. So, number one, moving forward with this plan, what does coverage look like in Hamilton County schools if we had all 10 of these filled? Is that every high school and every middle school, which was originally our plan?
Right. We'd be moving down into elementary schools.
We would have every high school, every middle school, and be moving into elementary, just to repeat this back to you.
We're pretty close right now to every middle and high with an SRO.
Right.
We've got a couple that are out on leave. We've got a couple that are vacant. But with these 10, on top of our largest elementary schools, we would be going down the next tier of elementary schools.
Okay. So what happens at the end of the school year with these. So we've got
So we've
effectively
talked-
4
yeah.
months, February, March, April, May.
So we've talked about this a little bit. I think that if we could hire 5 to 10 of these and it goes well, to me, that's an indicator that maybe this is a step that we want to consider moving forward. If we can attract the right people, we've got the right person to train them, and it's successful, I fully anticipate coming back and saying, I think this is an approach that we need to consider moving forward.
So you said that these school security officers would not do any kind of counseling with students. It sounds like they would be relatively separate from students. They'd be patrol security guards.
Correct. But if this turns into a long-term program, you've got to think about it. If you approve it Thursday, it's going to take us a minute. I would anticipate end of February, 1st of March for the first one to be ready to go. We're not going to have time to give them the training they need to really do that kind of counseling and support for kids. If this is a program that moves on further, then absolutely, I think that's a component that becomes part of it.
So potentially, could we move toward a grow our own SRO program?
Hard question.
I mean, if the
Sil.
sheriff can't train them up, it sounds, and suddenly we're able to hire these folks.
I think I would go ahead and repeat what you said at the beginning. The SRO is a gold standard. The SRO I had at Red Bank High School. Red Bank High School had been there for 7 or 8 years, was phenomenal with kids.
Okay, so to circle back to that then, if the SRO is our gold standard and we're going to hire people now, is this a contract February through May?
Year to year.
Yeah, so
It's a year-to-year contract, so we want great people.
No,
They're not gold standard, but we're going to hire.
year to year
February.
now, but again, if we're successful, I would see this as something that we would bring back to consider, do we need to just have some that could fill gap? I mean, we all have all the time SROs that are getting sick, that get injured and have to take leave, and this could be a way to ensure that we are securing as many campuses as we can.
Okay, so will these folks receive benefits?
Yes.
My question.
Okay, so we're talking about a $35,000 to $40,000 salary plus benefits. It has always just stood out brightly to me, the cost of a school resource officer, what it costs us versus what that school resource officer takes home to feed her or his family. And the number that is in my mind, and tell me if I'm wrong, is that we pay $30,000 worth of salary and $30,000 worth of benefits for a school resource officer, and we pay that to the sheriff's office. Am I remembering that correctly?
It's really more like 80 to 100,000 because you have to factor in the car and the equipment. And so for our 500,000.
I want to talk about the money that's going home with that person. That's really what I want to talk about.
The money that's going home is the salary, obviously.
So the
benefits are yet.
$30,000 salary is, I'm remembering that correctly. And then, so we've got $80,000 to $100,000 cost per.
Closer to 40,000.
Closer to 40, okay, that's sounding better because you're telling me that a school resource officer is our gold standard, but we're going to offer people who do not fulfill that entire skill set.
I would have to look into the price of what a deputy makes, but I think it's more than 45. That's just
The
off
number
top
that
of my
we
head.
had was 30 and 30.
So we know, and Sheriff's Department would be much better to answer this because that's kind of their expertise. But I knew for $500,000, we were going to get roughly 7 school resource officers, and there were still some things that we were going to have to figure out to navigate. And so it's roughly $80,000 give or take for each one.
So I'll kind of show y'all where my logic is, what I'm trying to puzzle through is. School resource officers are incredibly valuable to our schools and our student bodies. They are. And we know that's what we want the most of, is a highly trained school resource officer that loves children, that is a positive presence in a school. So just as we think through how we create this job description, if we make a less skilled person take home as much money with great benefits as a school resource officer is going to come in and make less. Do you see how over time that's a problem to recruit school resource officers? Which, if then we can grow our own school resource officers, that's an interesting conversation. So
We're really approaching this one step at a time. And so this is a start. I'll speak to the teaching side. We are absolutely looking at growing your own for that. I think anybody in public service right now, just because of, we've got a great economy. And when you look at public service, just candidly speaking, recruiting is very difficult and people have choices right now as far as jobs. And so I think back to the point earlier, do we think this is a long-term solution? We really don't know the answer to that right now. We need to see what we attract. It could be that we attract current deputies in other counties in Georgia or wherever that want to come over and be a part. And I think that elevates the conversation to a whole nother level. And I think it gives us pause to begin to think deeper about what's there. I agree the gold standard is absolutely an SRO, but the gold standard is to have, security presence in every school. And so, I think it's for us to have consideration about, we've struggled to have field from the SRO shop what we have right now, and if you expand it at all, that just puts that much more pressure on it. So, let's just hypothetically speaking, when you talk on the interim, let's say you get 5 to 7 folks over the course of the next month and a half or two. And those folks come in, and then let's say that the sheriff's department figures out how to fill all of our current SROs. Well, I don't think it's out of the question for us to come back and say, if the gold standard is to get that presence on every campus, we want to retain the 5 to 7 and look at, expanding that to other elementary schools, because that's where we're at this point. I think that's a consideration that we'd have to make. So, your concern, and I'll be honest, Dr. Corbin was very helpful in thinking about what the range needed to be just from his context and experience, and really, and he gave some candid feedback about what this might do from the standpoint of recruiting talent to these positions. And so I think that's a real consideration.
Okay. I had some other questions, but they've left me and I didn't write them down, so I may have more on Thursday. Liability. So we're now training, Hamilton County Department of Education employee, in coordination with the sheriff's office, is now training people and going to allow them to carry guns in our schools.
Yeah, so I need to clarify, the training they will have to go through firearms trainings, not just delivered by Dr. Corbin. There's some of the training that Dr. Corbin can do, but I don't think that he can certify them to carry. They would have to go through,
Well, they're certified to carry, and they're certified to carry in a Hamilton County school.
True, but I think that I heard a theme of that I was hearing that people were thinking Dr. Corbin would train them to certify them to to carry a firearm. That is not correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
That was one of my questions.
Okay.
So he can't train them, they have to go through the
Right.
training. Thank you.
Scott, how do you feel about this? Liability-wise?
Well, playing back on another theme, it's a policy decision for the board. And like everything else, you have to weigh competing interests. If we could be absolutely certain that nothing would ever happen to any of your schools, then this is an unnecessary risk. But we don't know that. And so I think, to me, drawing from one of the presentations that we had at the TSBA convention this year, I think this can be part of a global holistic approach to school security. And if this person's taking point to advise the principal, I think it could be a very valuable position. To your question about someone carrying a weapon at school, I think that it would depend on the person and the training, just to be perfectly honest. I think we live in an age now where we have a non-zero chance of someone coming onto campus and threatening harm to our kids. We have a non-zero chance of that. And so the question becomes, what do we do? You can't rely on an SRO as a tripwire. That's one thing that presenter was very clear about. He or she is one part of a global approach to school security. And so I think if this board, and I'm not hearing this from this board, I'm certainly not hearing this from Dr. Robertson or Dr. Corbin, if the board thinks that a school security officer is the panacea who's going to solve all of your problems, that is dangerous. And I would say I feel very bad about that. But that's not what I'm hearing from anyone in this room. I'm hearing that this is one brick in a security wall. So I think it's responsible to look at this brick and decide how you're going to place it. And as Dr. Johnson said, you're at the early stages. I think there's a lot of time to think about how this brick is going to work alongside your other bricks. So what do I think about it? I think it's worth exploring.
Okay.
Realizing that I don't have a vote and I am the least important person in the room on this issue.
Okay, thanks, guys. I appreciate you answering all my questions.
Ms. Jones.
So, I guess to go along with what Mr. Smith was saying earlier about the buy-in from the Sheriff's Department or Chattanooga Police, I would like to know what that looks like in that, what would their response time be if something escalated or arose that was beyond the SSO's parameters or abilities? I would like to know what that looks like. So does that mean that they have to find somebody, or when the call goes through, that just the officer that's in the area is going to show up, or is there somebody like pinged to know, like, hey, if something arises in the Missionary Ridge area, you need to get there, like run all lights and get there? Like, what does that look like? And then second to that, if we were able, like, and I know Dr. Johnson said we're taking this step by step. So if we were able, if this is successful in the trial period and the cohort works well, and we're pursuing this to go maybe long term, is there an option or a possibility that we would be able to have them as commissioned officers, or no? I know there's two different questions. And I think just I'm kind of struggling with this. I've worked mental health. I've worked just professionally. Now as a mom, I just told Tucker, like, I'm not really sure if I want my baby in the school with an SSO versus an SRO. Having been a child of a police officer, I'm not really sure how I feel about that as well. And so I'm just kind of struggling with that, because I do want something in place, but I don't want something in place for the person who may not, the bread may not always be done almost done in the oven, and they take a chance and say, hey, well, we're going to go over here because this officer is an SSO and it's only so far he's going to be able to go. So we're going to target this school. And I know I don't want to put it out there because I don't want to live in fear like that, but that's really making me nervous because I'm just like, once again, with the way the world is, we can't guarantee it with an SRO. We can't guarantee it with an SSO. I mean, I would like SWAT in the school my kid is in, but I'm just saying, because he's my one and only, but I'm just saying, I think, I don't know, I think I would rather know securely what our local law enforcement, be it Red Bank or East Ridge, what is their plan to support these individuals in our buildings? Because, I don't want nobody to get Dunkin' Donuts and something popping off at Lakeside, and by the time they get there, it's there.
And I fully agree with you. I mean, my daughter was in the school system. I wouldn't put just anybody in her school. It's the same concern that I have, but I would point back to the fact that we do have schools that don't have anybody.
Right.
My daughter was at one of those, for 4 years. So,
I think one word of caution I would give, just one thing I think we talk about, and always, anytime we enter the conversation about safety, I think it's always important. I know the media covers this and everything else, but I'll speak as a father that wouldn't mind SWAT as well. The more we talk about it here, the weaker we make ourselves as a target. And so I just think it's something we need to be really thoughtful about. SSO or SRO, the more we talk about it, the more we strengthen or weaken the role. And so I just think it's something that as we continue to have the dialogue and conversation, there are a lot of details, but I think to the point earlier, we all know we have, I don't want to say that. We all know we have schools that need additional security supports. And I think to the point Scott made earlier, we've got some things in the work. We know with the East Vernon property sale, and I mentioned the things that we've run down and done the last time, but we also are in the process of phase one. And Justin, I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but you have a town today, so I want everybody to come see you in the tie. Just real quick, if you could just take 1.5 minutes and talk about just kind of where we are phasing, because these are some things that are going on as well to holistically deal with the safety and security aspect. So the phase one.
Correct. So we had Franklin Architects, hired them to do a survey of all of our schools, identified several, made a list, and in our first phase, hit some schools that were not as complex, some that we could easily get to with a storefront system with different locks. So the phase one of that process will come out. We're probably 3 to 5 weeks out before we're actually going to bid that. So over this next summer, probably before school's out, and definitely it's going to ramp up this summer, you'll see a lot of changes. I think we're around 30 schools is what we're looking at right now.
And just for clarity, it's for forced entry to the front office.
That's correct. That's the main goal. So anywhere where schools, where you have an open lobby where you can walk into the building. I'm very familiar. My son goes to Dalton Middle, actually. So when you walk, you just same setup. You walk in, you can't go directly into the lobby. You're forced to the office, whether through buzz-in systems, cameras, whole 9 yards.
So it's just multiple layers to this, to the whole safety conversation in our system.
Mrs. Lennon.
I'm very excited about this. I like it. I think that we have taken a step in hiring Dr. Corbin, and now this is the next step. This is another layer, and I think these are great questions. And it's scary. And I think that we have to be very diligent in developing these partnerships with the Sheriff's Department. And Chris, I agree. We have to make sure that all these steps are in place, and that, but I feel like we have to have confidence in Mr. Corbin and knowing that they're going to train the student security officers and just maybe take these baby steps, because this is big. But I would hope, I think the liability issue, all the questions that I was going to ask, I think have been asked. I think but I like the idea of having it in-house. I feel like that there's so much that we could possibly do that I see, even from a standpoint of even mental health issues, of training them the way that maybe we want them to deal with our students on a different level, that maybe the SROs maybe on a different, the hours that they work. I don't know. I just think that there's a lot of possibilities and opportunities that we can have, that we see. I am concerned about the contract and how that's going to work, and the amount of, I think there's just a lot of unknowables but I think that I'm willing. I think it's a great idea. I'm excited about it. So thank you for all the work and that you're putting into it. I think that let's move forward with it. Let's get some security in these schools. I'm excited.
Dr. Highlander.
Thank you. This is relation, and I do appreciate all the work that you guys have put into this, Dr. Corbin, you, Dr. Robertson, and I agree with what Mr. Smith said. We need help wherever we can for safety. But with relation to what Dr. Johnson said, I have long thought that these SSOs or SROs dealing with elementary schools where they don't have a full-time person there, that we could have them on a rotating basis, to where they could be in one, say if they had 3 elementary schools there they work with, and not tell the general public. Now the principals, administrators, have to know where they were. Central office, Dr. Corbin obviously would have to know. But if we had every school covered at least part of the time, the small schools, large schools, I think that would be appropriate. That way a perpetrator could try to come in and not really know where they were covered or where they were not. And that's direct relation to what Dr. Johnson said. And Ms. Thurman and I and 2 or 3 others went to Nashville. I think, I'm not sure if Mr. McClinton, I don't believe he was there. Several went to a school safety summit with the governor's office a couple of years ago. And one thing they said was that Sheriff Hammond would like for us to buy a new vehicle. But I mean, and I talked to Sheriff Hammond, I said, what they do throughout the state is they take the most worn out car that would not go on a high-speed chase, but it'll cluck, 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 get them to school. And they're required to have, SROs are required to have a vehicle on the campus. SSOs would not. So if they did multiple elementary schools, a perpetrator would not know if there was an SSO there or not, and that would inhibit them coming in, I think. But I think we need to realize that we're not buying a brand new vehicle for Sheriff Hammond's people to get one. We're letting them take the oldest clunkers in their fleet and put them in. And as long as there is a vehicle there, we're meeting the state law. So thank you, Dr. Johnson.
Mr. McClendon.
I just want to say that I'm glad that we're taking these steps, these first steps. I know I've kind of hounded Dr. Johnson on school safety the last couple of weeks, and want to say thank you for coming up with this and looking kind of outside and see what other counties are doing across not just the state but the country. But I'm happy that we're moving forward with this, and I think it's a great first step to see if this works and see what else we can do in terms of school safety.
All right, any other discussion on this item? All right, that brings us down to administrative business matters. We have purchase of property there on North Access Road. I believe that's in relation to pharmacy. Is that right? Mr. Goldberg, you want to touch on that?
Yes, this would be the site for the second clinic and pharmacy on the north side of the river. It's a building that's ideally suited for it. It's already got exam rooms, exam tables, an x-ray facility, a lobby. It's got a good roof. Building's in good shape. It's ideally suited for what we want to do, and all the equipment stays in the building. And this would be funded through the internal service fund, just like everything else related to the clinics and pharmacy.
Did you have something, Ms. Robinson?
Yeah, well, my question was, what pot of money is this purchase coming out of? But you answered that. So I just want to make sure the public is aware that this facility is being purchased through that fund and not through, the funds that we were given by the commission a couple of years ago, going toward school facilities.
Yeah, these funds essentially come from the money that we withhold from employees' paychecks for insurance premiums, plus the amount of money that the school system contributes for health insurance. And we have a fund balance for that fund, and that's where the funds would come from.
Okay. I am curious, why buy versus lease for this?
It's a better deal for the school system to purchase the property. It's below appraisal, and it's already got all the equipment we need. It's something that we can open up fairly quickly, and it's a good piece of property across from DuPont Elementary School.
I looked at your contract and I can't tell how big the property is. Can you tell me how big the property is? Honestly, I'm thinking about like future use. Like if for some reason the clinics don't work out, we need to repurpose the property. Like, is it too small to be repurposed for a school, or could it be? Or
yeah, the property size is essentially the size of the building plus about 8 parking spaces.
Yeah, but is it like half an acre? Is it a whole acre?
Less than half.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I got it. No, it's not. Do you have is that like, is there any parking issue with zoning parking issues? No. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
My only other question is, what is the actual purchase price at the end of closing? I saw that it's $500,000, but that doesn't include closing fee.
Yeah, so we'll have additional costs. So 500,000 was the price. We'll do a phase one. We'll probably do a survey, boundary survey. Commission costs are paid by the seller, and then we will have a little bit of closing costs. That's how we typically do the deals.
Like $50,000.
I would say less.
Yeah,
I'd say less than that. Yeah.
Is that right by Access Road?
It is.
Yeah.
Just up.
It's an ideal location for that side of the river. It's easy to get to. There's enough parking for what we need. And the fact that it has X-ray facility, it already has a leaded X-ray room. That's something that we will not have at the clinic out here. So that we'll be able to contract X-ray technicians to utilize that space for our employees for X-ray services.
As well as the clinic tables and the X-ray equipment itself.
Well, so I want to better understand the structure of the whole deal. So we're buying the property. The operating company is one-to-one. Is that correct? They're coming in, and are they leasing it from us, or they're them just having a facility through us as part of the deal?
So it's actually our facility. One-to-one will only provide the staffing. So the contract with one-to-one is for them to provide staffing for nurse practitioners, nursing services, lab services. They do not do X-ray services is not part of the agreement with them. We would have to contract with another party for that, which they can help facilitate. The pharmacy is contracted for staffing through On-Site RX. So it's two separate companies, On-Site RX and One-to-One Health. So One-to-One Health essentially is they're providing the staffing. So we're paying for the staffing and medical supplies, room supplies, lab supplies, those sorts of things. And then the pharmacy is the same way. They're providing staffing that we pay for, which are state certified pharmacists. And then we will buy the drugs essentially wholesale. So we will be buying the inventory that the pharmacist will then distribute to patients legally as pharmacists. And then One-to-One will also be providing us with some data management for wellness purposes, so non-identifying information, all in accordance with HIPAA. And they will be able to provide us some wellness program benefits that go along with the regular clinic service for urgent care or whatever other types of medical services they provide.
And only Hamilton County employees can use the facility?
Hamilton County employees and all dependents covered by our insurance plan. So anyone covered by our insurance plan will be able to use the facilities free of charge.
Okay. So, I mean, I know that at One-to-One's other locations, I mean, they're paying rent. That's why I asked that. And, and the fact that we're buying a property, I'm thinking about, well, how does it pay for itself? But so anyways, that's why I'm asking those questions. But that data that they're collecting, can they resell that data?
No.
Can they make any money off the data that they're collecting from our?
No, we have agreements in place between them and Blue Cross and Cigna for all of that information. So I think like at the county, for example, they pay very low rent. I mean, it's just more of a mechanism for the agreement than anything. They don't recover any money at the county that way. There is going to be eventually One-to-One will have their own facility located in Chattanooga that all of their employers that they contract with, like the county and us and others, will be able to access as well. And we would just pay a fee to be able to have access to that, not purchase anything.
Okay, thanks.
Mrs. Thurman?
Yes. Mine's racing 1,000, all the questions I have. I think that it would be beneficial for Thursday, the public at large to understand what this is. I've had so many phone calls. Ms. Thurman, where in the world are you getting $500,000 to pay for this? Because they've been sold a bill of goods so many times that things that were going to save us money that cost us millions. So I think that if we could kind of lay out exactly what this is and how it will indeed save money, I think that would help a lot for the public to understand what's going on here. Also, I had some retired people call to ask if they would be able to access this. I said I don't have a clue.
So if they're retired and still on our health plan, they would have access. Once they're off of our health plan and on Medicare, they would not be able to access.
Okay, well, that's I had a couple of phone calls about that. But I just think we need to let people know exactly what this is. And I know you said the county's been doing this for a while, and maybe kind of, let them know how it works and if it did in fact save money. So I just think that would be real beneficial for everyone.
Dr. Highlander?
Thank you. Did I understand you say there are only 8 parking spaces at this facility? Did I misunderstand that, or did I mishear it?
Yeah, I mean, there's 8 to 10. I mean, when we looked at the site and One-to-One was at the site with us, there's plenty of parking for staff and patients based on their experience running medical
I guess I misunderstood. I thought someone said 8 parking spaces.
Right, it's 8 to 10 or 12, I mean.
You did say that, but now right behind that office, there's a little parking lot. It's probably 20 cars. You know what I'm talking about? Is that there? Is that part of this purchase too?
No, I'm saying that there's 8 to 10 parking spaces on the property we're purchasing.
Yeah, around the front of the building.
Right, for patients to use.
But I do know that there's a parking lot right up behind there. Been there many times.
That was not included in the purchase.
I think it's a separate parcel.
Yes.
I guess what I'm thinking is, if we have patients come in, we'll also have a drug facility there, right? People come in to get prescriptions after work. I could easily, Hamilton County would have, Hamilton County might have, I've seen down there where the Hamilton County government, they'll have 25, 30 people there at one time. I'm just a little concerned. Now, this is tongue in cheek. We're going to have MGT check it out.
I saw that same thing, but they said it was good.
That's tongue in cheek.
Well, one thing I will say is the county only has one pharmacy location. We will have 2.
We have a lot more employees than they do too.
Right.
So I'm just thinking, I've been down there, I've seen 25 and 30 at a time there. If we have 8 spaces, I'm just a little concerned. And like Mr. Smith, maybe we can go and encroach on somebody else's parking lot. But I was just a little, and it sounds like a good opportunity to save money and overall good. I'm just concerned that we have to have adequate parking because a lot of people don't feel like walking real far.
I would think that you've got a scheduling. I think you've got a scheduling component there as well. And so, just because of how it's going to be staffed, you probably don't have the staff to have, 15 different appointments set. So it's probably a piece of it, and I'm sure it's one-to-one. We defer to them, but a piece of it is just the scheduling and how many folks they would anticipate during the time frame before, a new set of people come in for appointments as well. Just as a point of reference, in my former county, we had 7 on-site sites. We had one main site that was open every day to include Saturday, and then we had established portables at every high school that worked on a rotating schedule during the course of the week. And so as a former employee that was in the school system that had that, candidly speaking, if it was a sniffle, if it was a sore throat, that was always my first stop as an employee. And it really, the cost avoidance for the system, employee premium holidays because of some of the savings and such were things you were able to put back to the employees. And then the overall wellness of the system really was extremely advantageous. So I think it is definitely a right step when we talk about really the holistic support of our teachers and our leaders. I think it's an important next step.
Mr. McClendon?
Just to clarify, the commercial listing says 20 parking spots, 17 regular, 3 handicap. So.
And when you look at the picture, like I looked it up on Google. When you look at the picture, you can see those. Like you can see it's parking spaces behind. There's like 2 spots, and then there's some parking on the side.
And again, it was an acting clinic, and we had our staff look at it. So I feel comfortable.
So some of those spaces will be used by staff, right?
Correct.
Right.
Hey, Joe, I heard there was enough room there to park buses.
In that lot behind there, Rhonda, in that gate, if Joe knows those people.
Rhonda, you opened up a can of worms and you wearing my life out.
Thurman, you try to pick sides.
I'm going to take a seat.
All right. So anything else there on that property? All right, next we have renaming facilities at Loftus Middle. Looks like we've got multiple facilities there. Any questions, comments about that? Mr. Smith, I know you were on the committee for that, but okay. All right, that gets us down to our legal service summary and events and announcements.
Mr. Wingate?
Yes, sir.
I want to mention the East Ridge Athletic.
Okay, yes.
Yeah, we've got 2 items that will be amended items. One is the East Ridge property, and Tucker's been close to it as well, Scott, just the working through that. Then we've got a personnel item, Keitha Booker, that will be added as well as we've worked through components of that. Lastly, I would just note for the board, and MGT I know is next whenever we get to that point, but a couple of things that will be coming available over the course of the next couple of days is one, the MGT the Blueprint 2030 component will be, website portal will be open. We've got videos going up in regards as well to the zoning that's taking place. And so just a lot going on. As that tab opens up, I'll send it to all of you. It's already open, but as those specific resources are uploaded, I'll provide that to each of you and really point you to it. But really appreciative of our communications team and really, I think, giving the public a lot of good information in regards to zoning and MGT.
All right, Mrs. Lennon.
Chip Baker would like me to extend the invitation again to all board members for January 27th, 6 p.m. at the Children's Outpatient Clinic, to Don Mueller, CEO of Children's Hospital. The topic covered will be mental health, the opioid epidemic, and vaping. He would like to, again, extend the invitation. He said he has heard from 4 board members, but he's hoping that some more of us will come. Thank you.
127, is that right, Mrs. Lennon?
Yes, January the 27th, 6 p.m. until 7:30 p.m. at the Children's Outpatient Clinic.
Okay, any other items?
Mr. Chairman, we, maybe 2 or 3 months ago, I don't remember the exact time, but the board had voted and approved for our attorney, Mr. Bennett, to begin to have some conversations with Dr. Johnson related to his contract. And I'm aware, if you're a Titans fan like I am, Derrick Henry will be a free agent after this year, and every team in the NFL was going to be after him. And so that was the reason we decided to go ahead and open up conversations. And from my discussion with Scott, it looks like we're at a point to where we can begin. We've got a document that we're about ready to vote on. I also understand that, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Bennett, that it's not something that we could move tonight to put on Thursday's agenda because that would be too soon.
Yes, sir.
So we would have to have at least 15 days before we can vote on that contract. That being said, and as I looked through, I've kind of kidded Sherry about this a little bit as I've looked through our engagement timeline that I prefer to call the calendar. I believe about the only date we have over the next 15 days would be January the 30th. So, and I know we can't vote on anything tonight, but I would like to see us on January the 30th have a call meeting to discuss, act on, vote on Dr. Johnson's contract. So I don't know how we proceed with something like that since we can't vote tonight. But I'm real worried about, concerned that headhunters, the free agent guys will come kind of try to get our superintendent. And so I'd like to see us act on that.
My next, Mrs. Thurman.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but he's under contract still. Seriously.
That's correct.
Okay, well, he's not going anywhere unless somebody pays out his contract, and it's not going to be us. So if somebody wants him that bad, if they want to pay it out and he wants to go, let him go. And that's also in football. If somebody wants to go to another team, as long as that team wants to buy their contract out, they can. And I'd like to see that put in the next contract that's done, whoever we hire or whatever. If they want to leave in the middle of their contract, whoever wants them has to buy out their contract, not the Hamilton County taxpayers again. So I'm just not understanding why the rush. Why the rush? Like I say, if he's not going anywhere unless they want to buy our contract, his contract. He still has 2 years left on it, so Somebody going to hire him and say, we want you to come to work for us in 2 years or something like that? Is that the way it works? I'm not real sure. I've never known of one to work that way. But I don't know what the rush is.
Well, I think I just said that. My fear is that somebody will come and buy out that contract. That's my concern on it.
Okay, well, we were looking for a superintendent when we hired him. So, I just don't understand. The taxpayers of this county will not continue to stand for us to continue to do this. And we put in his contract for a reason that we would not discuss his contract extension until there was 1 year left. We did that for a reason because the Hamilton County taxpayers were sick of us doing this time. We did it with Register. We did it with Scales. We've done it time and time and time again. And I just don't see what the big rush is. Like I say, that's up to if he wants to go somewhere else and he don't want to stay in Hamilton County and finish up whatever it is he's started in his big plans. That's up to him. You might find somebody that has bigger and better plans. I don't know, but I don't like this game that gets to be played in the education system with superintendents. It happens all across the country. We're not the only people that deal with this. Every time somebody's contract comes up, they say, he may leave, let's get his contract, or you extend his contract, and then 2 years later, they make boneheaded decisions, and the county and the school board's ready for him to leave, so then they have to buy out his contract. It's just like a game. And this isn't a game to me. This is my home. I'm going to be living here. I will probably die here. And so this is serious business to me. If people don't love this county as much as I do, then I've been left with so many of the things we all have, so many of the things that other superintendents have done and then walked out and left us with a mess in lots of cases. And so, like I say, I take this very seriously and say this is my home and I love it and I can't imagine wanting to live anywhere else, but if somebody else wants to live somewhere else, so be it.
Dr. Highlander.
This is Mr. Bennett's question. Correct me if I'm wrong. I know in the NFL, Derrick Henry will have to have a buyout if he still has time left on his contract. Dr. Johnson is at any time a free agent that he wants to be. Am I correct? Or does anyone have to buy out his contract if he leaves in the next 2 years?
Well, so I'm trying to think back to history, but the board used to have in the contract with superintendents that under the termination clause, that one of the stated reasons for termination would be if the director left. This board took that out and said that the contract can terminate under these reasons. The first one is mutual agreement. So theoretically, the only way that he could leave is if the board released him from the terms of the contract. Now, I will also tell you, I have never known a board to hold a superintendent in breach of contract if he were going somewhere else. But according to the terms of the contract, the release would have to be mutual. You follow me?
So the majority of the board members would have to agree to allow him to leave, or he would be in breach of contract and someone would have to pay out his contract.
Well, strictly speaking, that's the way the contract reads. I have never known a board to hold a director to that.
And I agree. I would not think if a person wanted to leave that it would be proper to hold them back. Let me.
But you're correct. Your understanding is correct.
Okay. Let me just say, we have, Dr. Johnson has done some very good things. I mean, he has done some very, very good things, and he has brought a lot of positive results to this school system, to this county, and I'm very appreciative of that. One thing that concerns me, and I didn't really want to bring it up tonight, but I will since it's already been brought up, is that we hired some supplemental positions, which are very good positions. We had 2 chances to give our teachers pay raise. And one of them, we hired several supplemental positions, which are positive and are helpful for our system. But our teachers got a one-time bonus, instead of a raise. And then the governor gave 2.5%, which would come down to everyone about a little less than 2% probably. And we hired more supplemental positions, which are very good. And I'm not saying they're not good positions. But we have passed up 2 opportunities to give more pay for our hardworking teachers who have boots on the ground and are in the classroom.
With all
Pardon me?
Talking about this man in front of him like
with all due respect, we had a great agenda session, and I know this is a conversation that will continue on. I appreciate the desire to have the conversation. It has been phenomenal. I would encourage us to. I know you all got to have the conversation, but I do think it's a conversation you can have with Scott.
So I'm inappropriate. I don't think anybody. If I'm inappropriate, I'll stop. But
It is our meeting. I'm sorry. This is our meeting. And if the superintendent's, if he is uncomfortable, then he can leave. But this is our board meeting.
Guys, we got to the end of the agenda session. We've got an MGT session that we need to get to.
Right.
This conversation is not going well, and it's not going anywhere.
Okay.
So.
Well, I'm sorry then.
No, it's not that any one person. You don't have to apologize for anything. But let's continue on with our meeting and all right. So if we've got any other announcements other than what is listed there, anybody need to address that?
I would just like to
Go
say,
ahead, Mr. McClendon.
I just agree with Joe Smith. I'm not going to belabor it, but I'd like to see something sooner rather than later, and I agree with Josh.
Okay. All right. That brings us to the end of the agenda session. Let's take about 2 minutes here, catch our breath, whatever we need to do, get a drink, and then we will start with MGT.
Well, I mean, it's good, but
All right, folks, let's start heading back this way here. All right, thank you. We'll now move here to the next part of our meeting, our MGT discussion. Mr. Dan Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board, Dr. Johnson. Pleasure to be with you again this evening. Again, my name is Dan Schmidt. I'm Project Director for MGT Consulting Group, and here to give you an update on the facility planning process and where we stand right now with what we're calling Option C, share with you what we learned last fall with the community engagement, and talk about where we're heading from here. To set some context, we wanted to emphasize that we've been at this for now well over a year. It was over a year ago that you all approved our contract when we started putting boots on the ground and getting to know your community. Spent last spring gathering data, came to you last summer with a preliminary look at what needed to be fixed and how we thought that could be fixed. Took that preliminary look out to the community last fall and into December in a series of community engagement efforts, and took what we learned and heard back from the community, revised that preliminary look, and have that to share with you this evening. 3 different options here, but really the key word here on this slide is the word evolution, because it's option C that we're really focusing on moving forward. Option A, or version A, if you will, was the fix everything version, where we fix everything, renovate it, add capacity, everything right in place. That was over $1 billion in estimated cost. Option B was the look that we took out to the community. That was seeking to maximize efficiency, and that reduced the number of schools that you have in the district down to 60, increased the average school size up to 913, and injected in an estimated cost of just over $800 million. Option C is the result of listening to the community since last summer. $869 million, 67 schools, and 869 student capacity as your average school size. This option C is seeking to maximize both effectiveness and efficiency, and reflects what we heard from the community. I'm going to get a little bit more into option C here as we go. How did we get from option A to option B? Well, first we were trying to figure out a way to reduce the cost of addressing all of the deficiencies overall. We were trying to figure out a way to reduce the number of schools and to increase the average school size. These were efficiency drivers. Trying to figure out ways to optimize and best position available capacity. As your population is shifting, we need to have school capacity in areas where it does not necessarily exist right now, and less capacity in other areas. So it was about aligning your capacity with where your student population resides. Modernizing and improving school facilities and increasing and enhancing access both to magnet programs and to vocational education programs. Those were the drivers, largely seeking greater efficiency. Getting to option C was about community engagement, and there were 3 mechanisms for the community to engage last fall. The first was the online survey, and I will tell you 5,000 participants, over 5,000 participated in the online survey. About 3,500 completed the survey, answering every question. Another 1,500 or so answered less than all of the questions. But the way that we set up the survey was that you didn't have to answer all of them for the answers that you did submit to be recorded. Okay, so that's why I qualify it that way. Over 5,000 participants in the online survey. 5 community forums. I think all of you were at least one of them. Over 250 or so people attended those 5 community forums in December. We also held 2 community forums, 2 focus groups, talking with about 20 people in between those 2 meetings. That level of participation, particularly with the online survey for a community of this size and a project of this nature, is extraordinary turnout. It's something that it really, I think, exceeds what we would typically see and measures very well for the kinds of information that we receive received from your community and the themes and the ideas that generated from that. I was very pleased to see the level of participation. The prevailing themes, summarizing for you the major themes that we heard coming out of all three of those mechanisms of community engagement. The first one there has to do with academic excellence and the opportunities for equitable access to academic excellence across the district. We heard people say that they felt like they were getting opportunities, but they wanted everybody to have those same opportunities. The second was for a preference for fixing what you have and having neighborhood schools. We heard a lot from folks that said, we like the school that we have, we just fix it up and let us keep what we've got. Similar to that, but different, was an appreciation for small schools. Okay, so it was not just that I like the school in my neighborhood, but I prefer to have a small school environment, was another theme that we heard coming out of the comments and the feedback from the community engagement. And then finally, when we asked questions related to support for the implementation of the master plan, question one was always, would you support it? Question two was, do you think your community will support implementation of a master plan? Consistently, people said, yes, I see the need. I don't think my community will support it, though. That was not just a matter of, will my community vote yes in favor of a tax increase or support a tax increase. There was, and within that theme, a question from participants of whether the folks that have decisions to make to approve a funding mechanism and to move forward with implementation would carry forward with there as well. The community was much more broadly based than just, will my neighbor vote yes in a referendum or some other tax setting, supportive setting. Some specific ideas, 5 of them to share with you, that were really loud and strong that we heard in the process. The first relates to the Brainerd area, and that is that there was a strong sentiment that we heard that there needed to be a neighborhood school in the Brainerd area. The second, don't make Lookout Valley Middle High a K-12. Now, Lookout Valley Middle High a K-12, we structured that bullet in that way very deliberately because there was really 3 components to that sentiment. One was keep Lookout Mountain Elementary open. Another was keep Lookout Valley Elementary open. But the third, and maybe a little bit more surprising, relatively speaking, was the sentiment of, you know, we're not sure a K-12 is quite right for us. Right? There are K-12 buildings in your district and in the community. We see them across the country. The question, though, is for a particular segment of your community, is it the right solution? This particular part of your community said maybe not. And that's what we heard coming from the community engagement. The third here, reconsider consolidating all vocational programs to one site. The idea was to put all down at the Barger location. With a new facility, what we heard in response was, with the geography of this particular district, that might not quite be appropriate. And so let's reconsider that. CCA, we heard loud and clear, CCA wants to be sure they have the programs needed to support their particular program. A lot of pride in the building that they have now and concern that what comes next if they were to move would not measure up. We heard that very strong, very loud and clear. Similar to that was Barger's arts program. Remember in option B, what we took out to the community was moving Barger over into Woodmore and another elementary school. And the feedback that we heard specifically there was, wait a minute, don't forget, you have an arts magnet program at Barger. Let's be sure that we are preserving that program. So here's option C's response. To the first one of keeping a neighborhood school in the Brainerd area, option C says, okay, let's move Brainerd High School over to Dalewood Middle School's site and build a new Brainerd High School for 800 students on that site. Keeps a Brainerd High School in that neighborhood, but right sizes to the level of enrollment that Brainerd High School has. That's the idea there. The second, don't make Lookout Valley Middle High a K-12. Okay, option C's response, keep Lookout Valley Elementary and Lookout Mountain Elementary both open. Renovate them both, fix the deficiencies. Same thing with Lookout Valley Middle High. Renovate it. But remember, we still have at this point now a building sitting half empty. They're about 56% utilized. So in order to fill that remaining space, option C would rezone, redistrict kids from Howard High School to better maximize the unoptimized use of the space at Lookout Valley Middle High. That also has the benefit of helping to alleviate overcrowding at Howard High School. Okay. Geographically, the line are adjacent, so that makes sense. With regard to vocational programs, option C's response to reconsidering consolidating all programs at the Barger site is to have 3 regional vocational education centers: Sequoia, Hamilton County High School, and then still a new vocational center at the Barger location. Those 3, particularly with the body of water down the middle of the county and the geographic considerations there, help to balance out greater access to each one of those facilities. And the regional nature within the county perhaps helps with some real alignment of types of programs that you offer at a particular one to that particular area's needs. Ensure CCA has the facilities to serve its program. I want to stress in this that, and I think it got lost a little bit in the community engagement, but in any of these solutions, the programs and the program needs in the building would be met. That was always the intent, right? The renovation would be complete. But that message did not quite get through, and that's on the person saying it. So what we do here is to emphasize, but a little bit, that happens, but a little bit different scenario. In option C, CCA would move still to a 1,300 student facility, this time at the Brainerd site, maybe taking advantage of some or all of the existing bones of the existing facility, or maybe there is some new construction, or maybe entirely new construction. But the point being that it is a 1,300 student facility, now the Brainerd site. The distinction of the determination of whether to reuse the existing building or build new, or what combination thereof, really more appropriately suited for when an architect is actually designing the building and determining how much to do and how much that really maximizes the cost. In this option's cost estimate, we have the cost of an entirely new building built in, so that when it's designed and the rubber's hitting the road, then the architect can back that off. Emphasizing here state-of-the-art, also emphasizing K-12. This is where Barger comes in. So in option C, the response to Barger's desire to preserve the arts program, the arts program from Barger moves over and joins CCA to become a K-12. Barger then, the non-arts program, the non-magnet students would be absorbed into the surrounding elementary schools. So for those 5 main points, main ideas that we heard coming from the community, those are option C's responses. So returning back to option or versions A, B, and C, highlighting again with a little bit more descriptive narrative at the bottom, we've built from the fix everything to the maximize efficiency, now gone out and heard from the community, built off of that to prepare an option C that tries to maximize efficiency and effectiveness. $869 million, 67 schools, 869 is your average school size. It's option C that we will take back out to the community later this month with additional community engagement to solicit and gain more feedback on that option as it is developing. Within your packet, there's a summary of how particular schools are being touched. Now, I would tell you, any school that has no activities identified at it is not on this list. We didn't create a separate category for no activities planned on this particular summary. So if you can't find the name of a particular school, that's why. The way to read this summary is to think of it in terms of the categories on the left. Okay? So how many new buildings would there be? Well, there would be 7 entirely new buildings on new sites. How many repurposed schools or sites are there? Well, there would be 12. How many schools receive only renovations? There'd be 22. You see some of those school names are bold-faced. That's because they fall into multiple categories, right? You might have a site, for example, Normal Park, where the site itself is getting closed, the building, but the program is relocating to a building, CCA, the current CCA, that is renovated and has an addition put onto it. So in order to try to summarize what's happening at 75 schools into one sheet, we had to get some multiple layers of deciphering here. So that's how to really read this, is to look and see, well, how many replaced buildings are getting, where we're tearing down and building new on the same site? Well, there's 4 of those, and they're listed there. But if it's bold-faced, it's because it's hitting multiple categories. Okay? You can see at the bottom there, closed schools / sites, there's 11 of them, where the site or building, depending on how you want to think about it, that facility at that location would no longer be used in the plan going forward. In terms of next steps, we've got 2 community forums coming up, one on January 28th and one on January 29th. We'll have a little bit different format this time. We will present essentially this same presentation, 15 or 20 minutes of me at the front of the room, and then we're going to break up into small table discussions with facilitators where folks have an opportunity to respond to specifics of option C with a map on the table, asking them to answer 3 questions. What do you like? What don't you like? And how can we improve it? And really emphasizing to folks in the room that we need to hear what you like as much as we need to hear what you don't like. Because as we are reacting to the ways that we can improve things, we want to be sure that we don't inadvertently change something that is quite popular. We'll also do a couple of focus groups during that same week with some targeted groups of participation so that we get good feedback. And there is another online survey being posted this evening by the district's communication staff. So again, another round, another wave of opportunity for folks in the communities to chime in as we're developing option C. I was asked earlier whether option C is the end of it or how close are we to being done. And I said, well, I think our recommendation, maybe it looks like a C1, or maybe it's a D, or maybe even F. I don't know quite where we wind up with this. But I say that to emphasize that there is still opportunity for folks in the community to be a part of advancing different ideas on how we can resolve any remaining conflict within the plan. February, our team will be finalizing the recommendation and working on a phasing plan. You're not going to be able to spend, even if you had it, $869 million in 1 year. For various reasons related to, quite frankly, just simply the number of contractors in the local economy to be able to do the work, the district's ability to manage the work and adapt to it, not let alone the ability of the community to absorb and pay for that amount of work. It has to be phased over time. And so our time horizon typically is 10 years, and we like to think of it in terms of 3 phases, but we'll see if that makes sense as we start to put pen to paper. And then we'll be back with you in early March to deliver the recommendation and the final report. We'll close with a brief quote here from Benjamin Franklin. If a man empties his purse into his head, no man can take it away from him. An investment in knowledge always pays the best interest. Chose to close with that for a formal part of the presentation here, just to circle back and emphasize, when we talk about these things, and we're talking about facilities, it's a facilities master plan. But we don't want to get lost in all of that ultimately it is an educational facilities master plan. We are talking about helping with this part of the toolbox to help you and your staff and the administration to provide the best educational opportunity possible for the children here in Hamilton County, and we don't lose sight of that at any step of the way. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Mrs. Thurman.
Yes, and here, there's 384 students at Daisy Elementary, and you're looking to close it and send them to Saudi. Saudi is almost landlocked there where they are because we like to never got that school fit on that site to begin with. Putting almost 400 more students in that school makes absolutely no sense to me. For those of us that know that there is a difference in Daisy and Saudi, just because they put our names together doesn't mean that there's not a difference, because there is. Saudi is quite a bit further north than Daisy. It's quite a bit further north. For parents that who have to take their children to school, that makes absolutely no sense that they would have to go that far north to drop their kids off and then head back south. this is not going to fly. And the only reason you haven't gotten a lot of pushback on this, if it's pushback we need, I can get all the pushback we need for this. I might could see trading Daisy Elementary for Saudi Daisy Middle, maybe change their campuses around, but still there again, at the high school, we don't have a lot of land there at the high school to put any more athletic facilities, so I'm not real sure what you're just going to be losing a lot of athletic facilities by moving Saudi Daisy Middle. These are the kinds of things that need a lot more than just some people that are not from here that don't know how it's going to impact the community, and just looking at numbers on paper don't understand a lot of the things that go on here. But moving 400 kids, closing their school and moving them that much further north, I mean, there's a long way up to the Ray County line from Daisy proper, all the way up in the Saudi Daisy Middle. I mean, Saudi Elementary is not even in the middle there, but anyway, it's just quite a bit further north. It makes no sense to close Daisy Elementary unless you're going to give it another place. Like I said, maybe swapping the middle school and the elementary school. If you can fit all the athletic facilities, that might make sense. But this makes absolutely no sense to somebody from there.
Dr. Highlander.
I've got a question. I can read well, I think, but the relocated programs, I'm concerned about CSAS to be determined, CSLA on new or repurposed building. Are we talking, we don't have any idea of the site for CSAS or CSLA? Where are we looking at a site there?
So we've got TBD there for CSAS and the newer repurpose for CSLA right now. Frankly, quite a bit as a placeholder, because there are some conversations the district has going on that are not ready to be publicly discussed, that we're trying to capture by putting it that way in this moment.
Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Robinson.
Yeah, and I just wanted to also make sure to publicly say that, like, whatever those plans are, they have not been addressed to the board. So we do not know what those plans are. As a representative of CSAS, I don't know what those plans are. So, yeah, I don't think any of us do. So, but I was curious if you're still considering the Battle and Brown splitting, making Battle K through 2 and Brown 3 through 5. Is that correct?
That's right.
Did you receive any feedback at all on that?
No, didn't hear anybody for or against.
Okay.
And that's in an effort to try to balance out some imbalance in utilization between those two buildings. But no, did not receive any feedback on that.
Okay. I do think that your new options definitely show that the louder your voice is, the opportunity for change there is, because there are schools on here that you now have new ideas for, that it's reflected, I think, based on the crowds that you had at the sessions for sure. I would love to know which crowd yelled at you the most.
We had plenty of vigorous conversation.
I was there. Yeah. Well, you don't have to live here, but we do. Yeah. So the vigorous conversation continues even in your absence. So
I'm sure it does.
Mr. Smith.
You said you had 5,000 returned online surveys. Is that what you said?
That's right.
Okay.
5,000 participants, about 3,500 completed all of the questions, and about another 1,500-ish completed less than all.
Okay. Is there any way to know if those weren't duplications? In other words, if I want to go in there and do it half a dozen times, I could.
We did not limit the number of times that anybody could
participate. That needs to be fixed with this new survey to prevent the same person to go in there 100 times. And I don't know how you do that. I'm not smart enough to figure that out, but I know of people that have done that.
Yeah. We know that. There are ways to limit it. In this setting, we have never represented otherwise. This is not a statistical sampling. You won't hear us say that X percent of the community thinks this. We represent it as we did tonight. These are the major themes that we heard. But there's a recognition that if someone wants to stuff that ballot box, they certainly can. Yeah.
Mrs. Thurman.
Even with that, the level, and even with that, if it was 5,000 submissions by one person, there's still, that's not what happened. There's still the volume of the participation even with the recognition that I'm sure there was some ballot box stuffing, is still significant.
Okay. Well, just being from here and knowing the lay of the land, I don't know why we can't put CSAS and CSLA on the same campus. They have all that property over there off of East Brainerd Road. I don't know why we can't put both of them there. It's all the same students anyway, basically. Kids from CSLA go to CSAS anyway, so I don't know why you can't put them on the same campus. Another thing, I don't see anything about Garber in here. Isn't there some things going on at Garber? It wasn't even in this facility study. Are they still working on Garber?
That's right. Yeah, I think it's a separate, it's not.
I started to say we have other things going on that's not even figured into this. I think it's important for the public to know that this board is as much in the dark on a lot of this stuff as anybody. We don't know it till we get it written out in the paper. We don't know till we read in the paper that you're thinking about busing kids up and down Lookout Mountain. We don't know any of these things until our phones start ringing and people start asking us questions. I can't tell you how many phone calls I've gotten about Sequoia being closed. I'm at dinner at night and people are calling, Ms. Thurman, we're at dinner and we heard this and that. People need to understand this board is not really aware of anything that's going on. If they are, y'all are getting more information than I'm getting, because a lot of this I don't know until we get a facilities update or you change. A matter of fact, I noticed there was a $22 million difference in the thing that Dr. Johnson sent us the other day and the one that I picked up today. One of them says 869 million and one says 857 million, exact same paper, except you just changed a few little things on there. So, I think the public needs to be aware of that. And this is your plan, this is not our plan. Because this board has really not even had that much discussion about this. All we do is go to these meetings and put in our 2 cents worth and listen to everybody else's 25 cents worth. And I hope some more people in my district come out and understand. Like you say, it seems like the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So what is going on? I think the board needs to know what's going on at Garber. I would kind of like to know. And some other things going on. I just don't like the board being kept in the dark about a lot of this stuff. A lot of stuff like Tiffany said, you all leave, we're here. And I just don't like the way this whole thing's been run from the beginning.
I can speak to Garber specifically. So I know I've included in several board updates that there's been ongoing conversation about Garber and conversation with the mayor about, the potential of a
Conversation about what's what I want to know. I know you're talking to him, that's great. What's going on?
Yeah, I've talked about a vocational site and construction and trying to figure that out. I'm certain I'll put that in board updates. And so that's a continued conversation, one that, we don't know whether it'll completely materialize, but there's ongoing conversation that several of us are involved in having that. And I try to keep you apprised as we gain more and more insight and information with the Association of General Contractors. And that conversation's been ongoing for probably 6, 7, 8, 9 months at this point, kind of hit and miss. So that's that. I think, I don't know if there's anything else, but that in particular is a component.
The question you have, Director Thurman, about the 869 or the 8, I think it was 857 on the other, that 857 draft, that was an early draft of the PowerPoint. When we were finalizing it, we were focused on the things down below and just missed it. We corrected it for the presentation today. The number is 869 for that option C. Okay.
Mrs. Hill.
Thank you. I don't feel in the dark about this or the other things happening in my district. The Lookout Mountain proposed rezoning is something that I discussed with Brian's team as part of the zoning conversations related to the schools all over the county. District 6 is going to be majorly impacted in the next 10 years because we are growing and because we have some of the oldest buildings in the system. We are going to need to move children around some, and I appreciate Brian's team and how thoughtful they have been about the proposed rezones and the care that they've taken in going going forward with very conscientious ideas. As for this master plan, certainly there are check-in days, and we learn things on check-in days. I appreciated receiving an advanced draft, and I appreciated the opportunity to meet with you today, though I did not elect to do that. I've got some other family things happening. So while I don't always agree with everything that you all do or agree with how you do it, I do recognize that you are doing what we have contracted with you to do. So thank you for that. I want to talk about these community meetings. They were difficult for your team, I would imagine, though you certainly held your own. But they were very difficult for our community. Our community did not feel heard, though I think the resultant Plan C will demonstrate to them that you all were listening. I recommended at our board retreat that we not let you all handle this next round of community meetings, that our people be the ones to run these. Hamilton County Schools has really set a high bar in the last 2 years for community input. And while I recognize with the analytical part of my brain how this process works, our community is being faced with really difficult, big ideas, difficult and emotionally difficult ideas, in addition to this global concept of a master plan. So I need a little more detail from you about who's going to be running these community sessions. We've got these two. You're going to go to small tables. Who's going to be at those small tables? Are those Hamilton County community engagement folks?
Yeah.
Yes?
Yes, so we're going to absolutely, so a couple of things that have happened, and it makes better sense to connect right now. We have recorded, and several of you mentioned this, we have recorded Dan going through this option C.
Okay.
And so we have that on video. We'll post that on the web under Future Ready 2023, under Future Ready 2030, Blueprint 2030. We'll also connect the survey to it. That will go out in the morning. Additionally, and this is separate, but I think when we think about it comprehensively. And so when we talk about zoning, we're trying to look at 5 years, 10 years down the road. And so this zoning as well, we will be recording each option of zoning, because we understand that, I understand as a father that you can't get to every meeting and you're ripping and running, and it's great to have somebody explaining, to be able to click a button and watch somebody. And so we'll do that as well with zoning. But we'll put the survey out. We'll have both surveys out. The zoning survey won't go out to the 21st, but this survey for MJT will go out in the morning.
Will there be Spanish?
We are working on the translation of that right now. Okay. And so we will have it available in translation. As to the community meetings, our community engagement folks will be much deeper involved in this round of sessions. The first round was really, I think, more about MGT hearing and listening. Obviously, as it's going forward, we will become closer to the process and what's transpiring. And then I think it's a natural progression and handoff as we get into March and it's finalized or whatever the case is. And so absolutely, and again, based on the feedback that several of you had given in regards to the presentation, we've taped him in option C to make sure that somebody from the general public can go back and rewind and connect and try to understand in a deeper way. So we absolutely will be much deeper involved, and there will be less talking and more hands-on feedback, facilitated opportunities for
more conversation.
Absolutely.
And, some things that stood out at the last meeting that caused people to feel like their time really wasn't, or their voices valued. There weren't any microphones for people to be able to speak. Everybody had to shout. There was no videoing of the sessions. There was no big Post-it notes and notes being taken. So I'm glad to know that we're going to make improvements there. The word handoff throws a flag up for me, because I have a perception of what that handoff should be. I believe that handoff should go from MGT to us saying, thank you for your work, MGT, to us saying, we have now created a citizen panel who will take this and bring this work into a fully formed vision. We had a positive conversation about that at the board retreat. How do we go about formalizing that conversation? Is that something that, Joe, I need to get with Brian about and just keep bugging him until he says, let's make a panel? Or talk to me about that. I don't want that to get lost.
Well, I will say, when we talked briefly about it, because we ran out of time at the retreat to talk about that. I think we left it with, hey guys, you were able to kind of quickly summarize what you had there, and left it with, you guys go back, take some time to absorb this, look over it, and let's talk about it. So I'm completely open to us having some time to sit there and talk about what that handoff looks like.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
So maybe you just need to bug me here before March. We need to, obviously sooner rather than later, but times that are conducive for
I feel
everybody.
like the community deserves as much clarity and certainty as we can possibly provide them in this time of uncertainty and questions, right? So if the community can feel confident about after this plan, then this happens, I think that would help build some trust. One other question. The CCA community has shared with me a significant amount of information just about how much investment they have made in that building over time. And I think that is a real fear that people have that, the Papa group, that's their equivalent of their PTA, that they raise tens of thousands of dollars every year to invest in that building and invest in that building. So it's going to be really critical that we have the underpinnings of this idea that you have available in as much detail as possible at the community meeting, because they know penny for penny how much money went into that building and that it's gone in over 20 years. So please be ready to help answer those questions for them and to help them feel, just to really understand so that they can react and give you feedback that is useful and helps ensure that we've got great arts education in Hamilton County.
Thank you.
All right, anything else for Mr. Schmidt? Mrs. Jones?
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So I know initially in the initial recommendations, you talked about closing Dalewood and Brainerd. And then now I see that it's saying move Brainerd to Dalewood's location and build a new facility there. So is that going to be a middle high school, or is Dalewood still proposed to go to the Orchard Knob site?
Good question. Option C would still move Dalewood Middle School over to the new Orchard Knob Middle School.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions for Mr. Schmidt? All right. If we don't have any further events announcements, we are adjourned.